Hello and welcome to Access Chat. Today I'm delighted that we welcome a returning guest, Bianca Prins of ING and also Paul Geerts of SIA Partners. So great to have you with us, Paul and Bianca. Seems like ages since I've spoken to you, Bianca, but on the back of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, it's been a busy week for many people in the accessibility community. But I know that you've still got plenty to talk about, and we've still got plenty to talk about, because accessibility, as you say, is not a gesture. And you've written about this, and I think that this is a topic that you're keen to expand on further. So without further ado, would you care to introduce yourselves again to those of our audience that have not met you or are meeting you for the first time? So maybe we should go with Paul first, since you're the newbie to the show. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Neil. And I'm glad to be on the show. Really looking forward to this session. As you can see in the headline, also I'm working at SIA Partners, which is a consulting agency. We're worldwide active. I'm based in the Netherlands, and thanks to Bianca, I've been we work together on I think a nice report to get more. To provide insights to the market on the Accessibility Act, which is coming up in Europe, and I think that the good thing for it is that we really want to promote that banks and other financial institutions are spending some time on this and really are getting prepared on this. Because we think that it's an important topic to address. So we were pleased to work together with ING and with Bianca on drafting this. And I think this is also a great opportunity to share some insights from that report and answer your questions.
Thank you. And Bianca, for those that don't know, because you're actually a regular, not just on the show, but part of the sort of social media community. So I'd be surprised if people don't know you, but it'd be great if you could still tell people who you are and what you do.
Who I am and what I do. Apart from being active on Access Chat, most of the times, if I don't have any trainings or other stuff to do. So I'm Bianca Prins. I'm Global Head Accessibility at ING, and I've been doing that since 2017. You probably could have met me as a speaker at Enabling or at Zero Project. So from that perspective, there's many places. I'm also certified professional from IAP. So on that perspective, also active within the IAP community, especially in Europe. And from other things, you could know me. I've done some research, which is also shared last year on accessibility versus access to divide accessibility for persons with a disability from access in support of people with digital literacy. So from that perspective, that's one of the things. And I'm very happy that we wrote this report together with Paul and also with his colleague Stefan, who's not here today. Because one of the key things, and I think that's a unique thing, is that we had the opportunity to write this report together, to publish the report together. And that's a great thing, because that is in spirit of collaboration within the accessibility community. And something quite new for ING, and not for SIA Partners, but especially for ING. It's a unicum. So I'm very happy to be here today and talk about this report.
Fantastic. I see Deborah's itching to get in and have a question. So,
well, and thank you, Neil. Well, you know what I wanted to ask a question, which is probably a weird place to start, but I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and so I actually thought it would be a good question to start with. And also, it really ties into why we need this research so much. So one thing I would like to immediately say is I want to make sure that we send out links to the research so the Access audience can see that. So I know we'll make sure that happens. But I know I am global. My work is global, but I'm located in the United States, as many people know, in a lovely green Virginia. And But here in the United States, we're getting a little bit unnerved because a lot of our American corporations are, we fear that maybe they're backing up a little bit on their accessibility promises. That might not be true. We just might be nervous. But I was talking to somebody the other day, an expert in the field, and they said, well, Deborah, we're also seeing that in the States, but where we're not seeing it is in the EU and actually still in the UK. Those countries, the brands we're seeing are leading. And I just thought that was so interesting. And they said maybe it's happening because of, the laws happening in the EU. And so I just think that is a really significant change. I'm not saying American companies are not going to take accessibility and disability inclusion seriously, but the community is worried about some of the signs we're seeing. And it's not just from American corporations, because a lot of corporations are global. But I just think one thing I would like to get out of this call is I would like to make sure that our American audience understands what is really happening in Europe and why is this different from what we've seen in the past, especially at times when we're adding more legislations here in the United States, but we're fearful that actually some of our brands aren't taking this seriously anymore just because the tough times, to be fair to those brands. So that would sort of be my question. What are y'all doing in EU? Why did you do this research? And but once again, hats off to UK, because you seem to be paying attention to it as well. Not saying the States are not. I just think maybe we're a little bit distracted over here. Thank you for being on the show again, Bianca, and welcome, Paul.
I'm happy to take this one. And one of the key reasons, I think, that's also one of the things, it's slightly mentioned in the report, but in a lot of cases, accessibility, especially in the US, what I noticed is that often it's the nice to have. It is the extra thing they do. And within HR, it comes last. And I think one of the key differences I notice within the field of accessibility experts versus Europe versus the US is actually that because of the legislation, it becomes a compliance topic instead. If that's 100% good, I'm also not sure, because I rather believe in it from the business perspective. But I think that's one of the key differences. In the US, it's about liability, and it's accounting how much is this liability worth? Do we take the risk for a lawsuit? That's what I notice. And then I think there's the third one, is that the difference is that in many countries we see, and I see them too, conversations between businesses and the monitoring authorities. And that's, I think, the big difference between the legislation in the US and the legislation in Europe, because we have to connect with the monitoring authorities. We also say this in the report, have conversations with them, because they are the ones that will look into how the legislation is enforced, and they're the first stop to go. I don't know how Paul thinks about it, but I, from the field, what I notice, that's the big difference. Those are the big differences which stand out for me.
Well, happy to add a couple of views on this. And I already agree fully with what you said in the beginning, Bianca. It's like, it should not only come from regulation, because then you're complying. And well, all the firms, corporates, financial institutions, they all have a lot to comply to, and it's only getting worse and worse from a company point of view. So if that is the only line, that would be, that would not be, I think, the real thing to do so. One thing that we also highlight in the report is that we also want to emphasize that there is also something to gain from companies, because there is also economic power in this group. But I think other important steps on important things on this, on what's happening in Europe, is that, of course, you have to, I think, a good debate in society on how do we make sure that everyone can join in and participate in our world, in our society. And so in some cases, you see that accessibility is taken broader than let's say disability, but also in terms of capabilities to well, have a conversation or and understand what you're reading. So it's sometimes being taken very broad, or even access to digital tooling, for instance. So in some cases it's taken very broad, but that also means that there is an eye for everyone who is not always included. And that is really helpful in having this debate, and also internally in organizations having a debate on, are we open for all the customers that are out there, or all the potential customers that are out there? Interestingly enough, you see the same thing on the employee side. So also internally, a lot of companies are thinking about, am I really able to connect all my employees to the organization, or am I even open to having all kinds of employees joining my organization? So I think those movements are also, those developments are also supportive to this angle.
I just a quick comment on regulations and the difference between the sort of cultures of US and Europe. There was someone joked that the only industry that Europe led in was in creating regulation. I don't think that's true, but we are world leading on creating regulations. And I think an ex-boss of mine and Antonio's has some say in that. Our old boss is a chap called Thierry Breton, who has done a fair bit to create regulations around Europe. If I were to meet him again tomorrow, I'd be asking him where the explicit mention of disability, inclusion, and accessibility is in the in some of those regulations. So, I think that the concepts of an understanding of how we digitally include people, and whether it's digital inclusion or societal inclusion versus accessibility, there are many of these different angles. And as Bianca and I have talked about on different conversations, depending on the audience, you choose whichever one connects with them to make the progress. Because I think we have to be pragmatic. I agree with you, Paul, in terms of regulatory burden. Sitting within large organizations, there's so much that organizations need to comply with that it's difficult to know where to start, and that often those regulations conflict. So in complying with one, you may breach another. Especially when it's in complex multinational situations. That doesn't mean that we can't take a broad approach to and a structured approach to inclusion, but it does make it more tricky just to apply a sort of compliance approach as the main driver. I know Antonio's got a question, which is, so I'll hand over to him.
No, I was looking at some of the insights from the report and making some analogies between GDPR and the European Accessibility Act. And something that came out of GDPR is some of the governments and institutions that were supposed to be the regulators, they were the first offenders. Okay, so if you ask me today, and the Portuguese government or the Irish government is going to regulate and is going to be amongst calling out business for breaking the law when they are amongst the first ones to break the law. So, and on the other hand, we know that in Europe we have some governments that in the past had a kind of a more educative approach to, we know the case of the government in Norway, where they have a more educative approach in relation to, supporting business to become accessible. So, how do you see that? Is the European Accessibility Act just a law that comes out and then in the wild everyone needs to follow, or do we see the European Commission putting together or encourage countries to find a way to support business to move into this journey of compliance?
I think this is a complex one, Antonio, and you touch an important thing. One of the things, and that's an example outside the EAA, but within the Netherlands, we had a quota for hiring persons with disabilities, and the government didn't make their quota. So instead of getting the fine, they said, you know what, let's shift the quota and says it's about business and it's government. So then we can make it. So in that part, I was like, on the one side, I was really disappointed. On the other side, I expected this one to go. And partially, I am in some countries, I am worried for the same thing happening. So, for example, if I look now and I look at the AFM, the Dutch Monitoring Authority for the Financial Markets, if I look at them, I know, and I also learned that they miss part of the knowledge. So they're not as knowledgeable as ING is, for example, based on the fact that we've been working on this for a longer time. I know some of the other banks also do stuff. But when it comes to real knowledge about applying, and that's why we wrote this report also, is that's missing. So they need to start. And if I look at how long it took me to get to the point of getting a policy, getting training plans all together, it took me years. I mean, I'm like eight years ahead of some of the businesses in the Netherlands. That means they have a long way to go. So from that perspective, it will be hard. On the other part, we do see countries, like example Germany, which is going really strong. And to be honest, I expect earlier that a legal issue with any corporate business will appear in Germany because they're more strict, as they are also in cultural perspective. So they are really strict on the regulations. I would expect a country like Germany coming with an issue for Accessibility Act earlier than the Netherlands, but it could backfire on the Netherlands. Meaning that, for example, let's say it's an app, and I'm not saying a bank or anything, but let's say it's an app, and the app does not comply with WCAG. And the German judge says, no, you know what? This app has to comply, and we do the strongest regulative action we can do, which means market retraction. But the app is also used in the Netherlands, it's used in Belgium, and it's used in France, which means all the countries cannot use the app anymore. And this is the most extreme case. Let's keep it on that one. But in that case, it does apply on the Netherlands, even if the legislation here says we don't take it that strict, or the monitoring authority says, I don't see that issue as well. But the judge in Germany said it does. Those are the cases which will show how the EAA will be enforced. And that will be the interesting case. Before those things happen, that a judge in the German judge in this case says, the app is incompliant, you have to retract it from all markets where you're active. But what happens with the other markets? How are they going to reply? And that's the part where Antonio's problem comes in. And yes, it is a fearsome thing because there are quite some differences, and I see them where we have 8 programs running in the different countries, and you see differences in it. And from our perspective, we said, you know what, we can only fix this if we have an internal standard which complies with the highest standard in one of the countries, and the other countries have to adhere to that because components are exchanged and stuff like that. So from that perspective, it's a challenging one. But I don't think it's just the EAA that has this problem. Paul?
No, I think that this is a common thing, and that has to do, I think, and I can only speak about this as a European person. So, Deborah, please, the from American. But in the end, we're all still countries within a greater setup in the Europe setup. But and so there is still room for local adjustments, and we see that in all the regulation which is happening in Europe. But looking from a positive side, I think it's also good that we have this type of regulation on a European level, And that also, for instance, supervisors like Bianca is mentioning the AFM, but you have also the ECB and all others looking at what banks are doing, but also comparing banks. Because in the end, and that's the same for new legislation or assessing whether countries meet the regulation, it's hiring the bars every time. It's raising the bars every time, because the ones that are breaking the rules or that are not good enough performing on a, let's say, on a corporate level, on a bank level, there will be pushed by regulators or by supervisors that they should meet up with the average. And the average is by that going up. And that's, I think, the same applies for what Bianca is describing. If you have a multinational firm, you're setting a policy for a higher standard, meaning that the countries that are not that active will move up. And I think that's so from a positive note, we're moving up, but it's step by step, and it's maybe not ideal in all cases.
I agree, Paul. And I would also say that, I'm sorry, Bianca, but I would also say that I know that our culture of suing has caused an us and them between the brands and our community. And then you have business to business groups in the United States that honestly, sometimes I don't think any of us understand where they're supposed to play. Are you supposed to protect the brands at all costs, or are you supposed to care about the community? And I say that because in some ways, just the messy way we do things really complicates life for everybody. And so, and I have such empathy for these corporate brands too, because even if they're trying so hard and actually being successful, they get anything wrong and different parts of our community will come after them. So they don't even get appreciated for what they are doing, right? I won't mention the brand, but I posted something about an American brand that was just a nice little thing they did for our community that is deaf. And I was shocked at the attacks on this brand. Now, the attacks came with very grounded information. Did you see what they did to this employee? Did you see this? And all of this stuff has been in the news. And I remember not really sure how to respond to it, because once again, I'm building Billion Strong, bringing our community together. But I am pro corporation. I am only if the corporations meaningfully want to include us. If they are going to do like one brand did, just exclude all the blind users out of nowhere, fine, we'll talk up. We're going to fight for our rights. But this us and them thing has really been troubling. And I actually talked to a group that it represents a very large segment of our community, disability community in the United States. And they're saying maybe what we need to do is start getting other institutions to get together so we can sue them even bigger. So
no, but you're right. You're right on that one, Deborah. I think the them and us
an issue
is now that is a big issue. And I have recently, last year, you noticed too on LinkedIn, it happened when I mentioned that accessibility and disability inclusion, if you separate them out and you have the cultural part and you have the operational part, which is about accessibility, some of the US people, advocates, disability advocates actually were really mad because I just said that out loud. And I say it already for years. And the interesting part is a lot of the experts agree on it. And that's, but then it comes to the damn us. And I said, yeah, but what if you cannot fix a culture and without making sure that the ramp is there. If you fix the culture, but the ramp is not there, the wheelchair is not going to get in. Right. If you fix the culture, but your screen reader doesn't work, you cannot have the same experience as any other employee has if you depend on the screen reader. So from that perspective, that the we them, that's a troublesome.
I agree.
One. And
that's all over social media. We can't stop that. But I will also say that I will also compliment my beautiful country and say, because we did sue brands, we got brands interested to pay attention. And so I'm not saying the way we do it in the States is right, but we are going to continue to use our legal system. And our community is actually talking about us getting together even more to use our legal system if our brands will not include us or stop including us. I mean, it's not the way to do it. Let's not create an us and them. But yeah, we already did that in the States. That's who we are. It's just who we are. And I'm proud to be an American. I'm just saying we've made things messy. So we would appreciate if y'all would go and clean everything up, get fully accessible, and then tell the states, hey, we did it. Anyway, I'm being sarcastic there. Back to you, Neil.
Actually, I'm handing to Antonio because I know he had a question.
Okay.
So, how can banks keep up with the evolving accessibility standards and technology, gather feedback from users with disabilities, and understand the long-term benefits of an ROI of investing in accessibility?
We can do it all. I mean, it's easy. You can do it all. You've got one person. You just put your cape on, right? Pull your underpants over your trousers.
So true.
It's complex. It's complex. It requires resourcing. I think that actually, whilst we've given Deborah a bit of a hard time about suing everybody, test cases are important. Case law is really important, and case law is going to be important for the European Accessibility Act, and how that gets implemented. It goes beyond the boundaries of the European market, because if you want to sell into the market, so if you're in the UK and you sell products into Europe, the EAA affects you there. Likewise for US companies selling into the European markets. So that GDPR moment that you were talking about before, I think there is some parallel there in that this piece of legislation goes beyond those borders and will have an impact at a global level for accessibility that many of the other pieces of legislation haven't had. And that hopefully what will come towards is harmonization. What we're seeing is there is some harmonization of standards happening. So, for example, Canada is adopting EN 301549, so the European standard. That's also starting to sort of propagate through Africa as well. So Kenya adopted EN 301549 with knobs on, because they added a few bits. A bit like the Germans with BITV added a couple of bits to WCAG. Does everyone like acronyms? Because I think that acronyms are really nice and understandable. Well done, accessibility community. But I do think that as we get towards more harmonized standards, it makes it easier to do some of this difficult, tricky stuff. Because as Paul was talking about before, we're raising the floor and everybody's sort of having to come up to that baseline. At least we're all looking towards a common baseline.
And that was also one of the ideas behind the report. Is that on one hand we wanted to provide insights on what is the act about, but also on how do you implement this. And one of the additions that we from SIA Partners did is to use our yearly benchmark that we do on digital banking apps, for instance, on what do banks already have in place in their app. And simply by having 5 or 6 features to look at and to show within 37 banks, do they have this in place or not? You're already providing examples to banks who are not active in this yet, how easy it can be. Simple, like adding something like contrast or like a voiceover. We see that some banks don't have it in place, some have. Well, we hope by showing these simple examples, relatively simple examples, that more banks are getting enthusiasm on adding those features to the app. And that's also, I think, that's why we put it in a report and try to make it as concrete as possible.
Yeah, and an extension to that, it's about looking at the customers with a disability as economic value, and I think there the important element lies. And I know Deborah has been working on the same thing for a lot of years. But one of the key things, and I think in that perspective, Europe differs quite from the US, is that a lot of people still think even when it's not the truth anymore, that people with a disability are much taken care of, but they need to do more themselves. There's a lot of things which were arranged in the past. They're not arranged anymore. People need to live more independently. And that also comes, and that's why this report is so important, because you cannot live independently without a bank account. You cannot hold a job without a bank account. You cannot pay your taxes without a bank account. It's these basic things why this sector must have to step up, because otherwise a lot of the elements, and it's the European Accessibility Act, it's the UN CRPD, the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. If we want to work on those things, we need banks, because the simple fact, it's about the economy. And everything in the end, how unfortunate it is, it's still about money. I mean, you can live in the woods and have your own garden with your vegetables and everything there, but you still have to pay your utilities, Deborah. So from that perspective, those things are often, I don't think they're not recognized enough for the disability community. We heard words like disability tax. If you explain this, a lot of people don't understand, but it is there. It is about extra costs, but also we see more people with a disability find a job, meaning their income grows, their disposable income grows. They can spend more on so many things. And they want to do that. So in the essence, if the European Accessibility Act really would do its work, and I think we had seen some of the examples with the ADA, but those were more based on lawsuits. You see it as I don't know how you call it in English. In Dutch, you say a vliegwiel. So it's a wheel going faster and faster.
Right.
And the treadmill goes faster and faster because you have the part of, if you have access to the bank account, if you have access to the job brings more income. You can buy more stuff. So you not buy the cheapest thing. You want to have choice. And that's one of the key things. Because if we talk about accessibility, and Susanna Lauren brought it in a few months ago, I think, and she did a study on it for IAP, the multimodality element, the ability to choose what you want to use. Do you want to buy the washing machine from label A, B, or C? Or do you have to buy A because that's the only one which is accessible? Or can you choose between the banks? Which bank is more accessible? That should be a choice. Instead of I can only use one because that is the only one which is accessible. And I think for providing the choices and within ING, it's the same thing. Are you able to use the web or the mobile application? You should be able to use both. Yeah. That's what accessibility in essence is about. It's not about pushing people to use one channel. It's about having them the ability to choose between the channels they want to use. Which one do you like? I mean, that's in essence what it's about. You don't want to be enforced. I mean, that's who wants to be enforced to use a certain thing.
We have enough of that from our government, right? So, public services have to be accessible because you don't have that choice. So a couple of things, and we do probably need to close in a bit, but this is an interesting conversation, so we'll stretch it. I remember being asked by one of my seniors ages ago, why are you interested in PSD2, Neil? What's that got to do with accessibility, right? And this is a regulation about portability of data in banking and so on. So, and for me, it was why I'm interested in this is it gives people access to choice. There may only be one accessible banking app, but you could choose through the power of PSD2 to actually start linking up the bank accounts that you couldn't access through the inaccessible apps to the one that is. So from my point of view, legislation in all sorts of adjacent spaces can also have a positive or negative impact on inclusion. And then the point that I wanted to make backing up what Bianca was saying was that actually when you include people, you contribute to the growth of the economy. And if we look at this in other parts of the world, so in the global south, for example, and particularly we're doing some work in Africa, I was having a conversation with our CEO of our African operations who's saying, but this is doubly important where I am, because you have the care, family care, right? So if someone is disabled and they're outside of work, it's not just one job that is lost to the economy and one income and one set of tax, it's two or maybe more. So by creating accessibility and getting people with disabilities into jobs, you're making them taxpayers instead of recipients of benefits, or you're actually making two people taxpayers. So you're doubling the net contribution to the economy. So rather than this stuff being seen as a fiscal drag on economies, this is actually should be seen, and we need more research on this, actually, as to how it creates growth and supports the acceleration of the economy, that spinning wheel that Bianca was talking about.
Yeah, but that's why I'm looking forward to the latest report, which I expect this year from Return on Disability Group. Because if you look at the 2016-2020 difference, and you look at the US, that's the same period where there was a lot of lawsuits, and you saw disposable income growing really fast in the US for the person with disabilities. And that's an interesting part. And I think partially has to do with taxes, but a lot of it also has to do with the change that more people became active in the economy. More people found jobs in that period. And that's an interesting thing. And I would expect something the same happening in Europe in the coming years, especially after 2025. But the big question actually is, how can we get those numbers on the big tables? Because I know that Rich Donovan is doing a great job trying to get his figures more on the table. But a lot of people don't know them. If I share them, then they're like, okay, oh, this is not possible. So, and especially one of the key things in those numbers is in the same period that disposable income doubled in the US for the disability community, and the community grew less and is still smaller than it is in the EU. And that's one of the things where I say, you know what, this shows, and it really calls for more research. And I'm really not the big numbers person. I use the numbers others have. So from that perspective, I'm really honest in that, because I like it and I like to do the research, but I get a headache from it, because 8s look like 9s and 3s. And so from that perspective, but that's that has to do with my disability. But in that perspective, we can do a lot. And that's why I'm also happy to contribute to research and say, okay, you know what? It's professional research. And it does find its way, as I posted last week on LinkedIn. Actually, I found out I was cited in 7 papers until now. And that's quite interesting, because I did not expect that. Because I have a small website. It's a Dutch website. I only have one English page which shares all of the research. On the other side, it finds its way, one way or the other, into the academic world. But we need to get more feet on the ground there to get those numbers, because we have all the independent researchers going around, but we need to get foot on the ground with the universities. So maybe we can haunt the Harkin Institute to help us out on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, or we can always haunt people. Excellent. Thank you for such an informative and engaging chat today. I think wide-ranging topics. I look forward to continuing this discussion on social media shortly. But I need to thank Amazon and MyClearText for keeping us on air and keeping us captioned and accessible. So thank you very much, Paul and Bianca. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you for having us.